Welcome to Words of Prey, which is a Pipeline Artists original podcast. You can reach us at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com and find us at pipelineartist.com/listen. Joining us this evening is Aaron Philip Clark, a native of Los Angeles, California. He's a novelist and a screenwriter. His latest book, Under Color of Law, which is the Trevor Finnegan first book in the series, came out on October 1st, 2021. And we'll hear a lot about all of his other publications and his writer's journey this afternoon. So please welcome virtually Aaron Philip Clark. So hi, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today on Words of Prey.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're already doing gangbusters because normally I forget to do the intro. So, so this is already doing great.
Off to a good start then.
I think I'm so happy that you're joining us because you have such a unique journey. Having started with your Paul Little series at Shotgun Honey, which is an imprint at Down and Out Books. Now you have the Trevor Finnegan series with Thomas and Mercer, which is a much larger imprint. And also you have had success doing the Pipeline Artist contests. So I'd love to talk to you about all of those things. But I think that my first question would be basically, how did you start? You know, I know that you had, you were inspired by your experiences in the LAPD. But is that, did you write while you were working? You know, how did this all come about?
Well, I would say how I started, just in terms of looking at it kind of as a macro level, just in terms of creative writing. I actually early on went to school for screenwriting, and then I pivoted over to creative writing, and I got my MFA from Otis College of Art and Design in fiction. And so the first book that I wrote, The Science of Paul, was actually my thesis at Otis. And I was able to get that published originally with New Pope Press, and then it was reissued with Shotgun Honey in, I believe, 2018. And so that was kind of the kickoff point. The only time I really stopped writing was when I did join the LAPD in 2014. And so during that time period, I wasn't writing at all. And then once I came out, I kind of returned to writing, and I wrote a standalone, a very pulpy standalone that's available through Shotgun Honey as well. That's called The Furious Way. And then from there, I moved on to this Trevor Finnegan series, really after I kind of processed my time in the LAPD and I felt I was in a place to write about my experiences. That's when I sat down and I said, okay, you know, I think I'd like to write a novel kind of set in this world of the police academy and a side of LAPD that maybe some people aren't familiar with.
I think that's really interesting. And to start at the beginning, so to speak, apparently your first attraction to writing was in screenwriting, which, you know, I know a lot of people who honestly do both, which I think you still do. But what was it that attracted you to the screenwriting aspect, and what made you feel that, as you put it, you know, the need to pivot to writing a novel?
Well, I always loved film. So I remember, you know, early on in high school, me and my friends would go see these independent films. And, you know, I just fell in love with cinema early on. And I said, you know, I think I want to do this. And at the time, I was living in North Carolina. So I was pretty far from Hollywood. And my family had moved from LA to the South. And so I was able to go to North Carolina School of the Arts, which now is UNC School of Filmmaking. But at the time, it was NCSA, or North Carolina School of the Arts. And so while there, I realized, I said, oh, you know, out of all the classes I'm taking, I really enjoy screenwriting. And I think it was just the idea of being able to take what's in my head and kind of, put it on paper, but still, screenwriting is like a hybrid because it's a blueprint for a film. And as you're writing, you still kind of have to think in terms of, okay, what would this look like? So you have the idea of what the shot would look like in terms of composition. But at the same time, there's still this kind of literary aspect to it where, you're telling the story, but you're trying to tell it in the most visual way possible. And so I just liked the challenges that it presented. And I liked, the idea of being able to, craft this film within the 3-act structure. And I guess that's part of my personality. I like structure and things like that. So organization. So I was really into it. But as I kind of came out of film school, and I realized that, I know this is a blueprint, but it's you spend so much time on a script. And the only way that script kind of, will come to life is if it is indeed made into a television series or a movie. And I just got to the point where I felt like, I was writing things on spec and I said, these are really good ideas, just to sit on my shelf with the hope that, someone will make it. So I moved into fiction and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to pursue this fiction thing and really, go to school for it. I applied to Otis and I got in and, I just wanted to focus on prose and I wanted to focus on poetry and even experiment. So I just wanted to kind of dive into everything and see just what I was really interested in. And so, while in that program, I think I was the only one who was interested in crime fiction. And that's always been something, crime and noir has always kind of been my love. And so,
well, even in an alternate profession working for the LAPD. So
yeah, well, there you go. So there you go. So like, and that's what happened. I've always been interested in it, and it has manifested in so many ways. Within my life, and so, at Otis, everyone wanted to write, the great American novel, and they were pursuing, these very lofty literary books, and I said, you know what, I this is my interest, this is my passion, so I started working on The Science of Paul, which kind of originated from an assignment we had where we were supposed to look at the role evil plays in literature. And so I had this character, I had the character of Paul, and I thought, okay, if I have a character who's done something in his past that is not, not great, and how that would have the trauma that would inflict on him over the years. And that's kind of how it started. And then it just kind of snowballed. It started as a short story. And then I realized, oh, this isn't a short story. It's like a first chapter. And so then I just kept going and going. And it became my thesis work. And I was able to get it published actually before I went before my thesis board with it.
That's a really interesting pivot, as you said. Do you really feel, because this is something that I'm very interested. I teach at various programs, including the LIU Brooklyn MFA program. And one of the things that I encourage students to do, like if they really want to hone the dialogue tools in their tool belt, read screenplays and, perhaps do some dialogue in a screenplay, format to really get a sense of how something would work just by dialogue, because you don't have more than a slug line to set the scene really for a lot of these things. And, kind of the opposite end of that, if you have issues with description and doing those, scene setting, learning some poetry that really tells you, how to use one or two words really well, instead of a whole mess of description that can muddy the waters. So do you feel that having started with screenwriting, that it really has added to your skill set as a prose novelist?
Very much so. So I learned quite a bit from screenwriting, and really what it is, it's about economy. And so, and it worked very well, right, for crime fiction and noir, because it's often about economy. You have these very crisp, clean sentences that can describe so much, that essentially, Raymond Chandler style writing, later, Elmore Leonard style of writing, where
Of course.
it's saying so much and so little, and so and because of having studied poetry as well, that's always been something that I've chased, the idea of trying to capture, beauty in these sentences without it being overwrought. James Baldwin had that quote where he said, write a sentence as clean as the bone, and that's kind of the goal, for me when I write. And so, when it comes to dialogue as well, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, I want to get at the heart of what my characters feel, but also have that subtext there, because
Right.
people rarely say exactly how they feel, right? It's always other things that they're discussing. And so, and there's always, they're inferring to other things within a discussion. And so, that's something that I've had a lot of practice at because of screenwriting, where one thing as it appears, one conversation can appear to be about a certain topic, but, we're really getting at the heart of something else that really is what the characters want to say, but don't know how to say it, or maybe too afraid to say it. And so, I enjoy that. Sometimes, it's interesting with fiction, because it's almost like wearing two hats. So when I do my first draft of a novel, I'm very kind of in almost the screenwriter mode. I'm thinking, okay, the plot needs to move. And then I put in, the foundations of that dialogue. And of course, it'll change with revision, but I'm kind of putting it all down. And then later, with maybe a later draft, I will put on that kind of literary cap, that poetic cap, and go in and kind of, put the spit shine on certain aspects of the book, because now I already have the plot down. It's tight, it's solid, and now it's almost like a release. I can have fun, and I can try and explore, different ways to encapsulate mood and feeling. I can play with style a little bit, and so it's like a freeing of being able to really get into kind of the heart of the novel, after all the kind of the foundation has been laid.
Well, yeah, I think that's really key, because so often, especially with new writers, which of course you haven't been for quite a while now, but you find that they're learning their character, they're learning their setting on the page. And that's why often when you get like a debut work, it's, you cut the first chapter, the first 10 pages, the first 20 pages, because that's basically the author exploring and learning the people themselves. So going back, like you said, in that second, more fun pass, and adding that subtext, because that's so much the human experience is not, I don't find out everything about you before I walk into a situation or meet you for the first time. And there's so much of that that's unspoken, especially if characters know each other well, and sometimes even not. One of the things that I will quote ad nauseum as an example of this is the Elmore Leonard, with Raylan Givens and Boyd, when one of the other characters asked Raylan, how does he know Boyd? And he said, we dug coal together. And there was just so much in that one line to unpack, that it just seems it's such an innocent line, and yet it spoke volumes. And I think that's really the wonderful nature of dialogue. And, it's like, I always tell my students to, eavesdrop as much as humanly possible, and see what kind of shorthands that the people are using, or what's unspoken, and include that in dialogue, because humans as a species are kind of programmed to pick those things up. We're not particularly the most direct. So if everybody is spelling everything out, that's really not an accurate human connection. So finding those things, I think, and looking for them, and then, like you said, put them in the second pass, have fun with it. I think is really key to establishing, long-term characters and relationships on the page.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. I mean, I liken dialogue to, it's very much like, I put it, it's, so if you look at a tree and the branches are kind of that foundation, and the dialogue is kind of the fruit that the tree bears. It's like, you
that's a
can have these
amazing
amazingly
analogy.
juicy. Thank you. It's probably because it's close to lunchtime, right? But that's the idea. It's like it could be plump. It could be like so just filling. If you get this really good, boxing match going, this back and forth. And so I try to capture that as much as I can, in my novels, and have those moments where it really feels like these two characters are kind of going at it, and sparring in a way, perhaps, and sometimes they're sparring with, it's with dialogue, but it's really with their world views, their philosophies, and how their philosophies may not align, and may be in conflict.
No, I think that's very wise, and like I said, that's a beautiful analogy. That the dialogue is the fruit, because you can, I mean, honestly, you can just tell a story without dialogue, but yet it is that dialogue, it is that interpersonal connection that I think really draws the reader in, and gets them to know the characters, as opposed to being told about them. And you can get so much personality and so much. I always say you don't really need backstory to your characters as long as you have dialogue, because things are going to be dropped in there or show up, or you're going to extrapolate as a reader information. And especially, this is very true. I mean, most readers are smart just on the whole, but crime fiction readers are particularly astute. And so I think, they're looking for clues, they're looking for things. And so dropping those things into dialogue, one of the old adages is that readers never ever skip dialogue, but they will skip, large sections of prose. So if you ever need to drop, an interesting clue or something that's really important about a character, or a hint to the solution, if that's the type of book you're writing, always make sure you put it in dialogue, because they're never going to skip that. So I think that's really interesting, and clearly your screenwriting background served you well. Which we're going to jump all around here, because I don't have a linear thought in my head. But since we were talking about screenwriting, how did you come across the pipeline contest that you won? Tell us a little bit about that and what that was like, and why you decided to pursue that.
Sure. So I actually had a few scripts that I had been working on just kind of on the side. So sometimes if I'm writing a novel and I just need a break, I'll move on to maybe a spec script or something along those lines. And in this case, I had adapted my first novel, The Science of Paul. And so I've been working on the script for a while. And so I had joined Coverfly. So through Coverfly, I was looking at different contests, different competitions I could potentially enter, my script in. And then I came across Book Pipeline. So I did some research, and I saw that one of the former finalists was Lee Matthew Goldberg, who is a crime author as well, and who I've been following for a long time. And so I said, Lee did I think he did like a little article or kind of I think it was like an interview, I'm sorry, and kind of a Q&A. And so he was talking about his experience with Book Pipeline. So I said, okay, this sounds pretty cool. So I did a little more research, and I said, I think I'm going to apply, because they were they had a competition for book adaptation. And so I said, okay, well that's pretty cool, because I already have a book. And that means I don't have to write I don't have to adapt it for this competition. They're only interested in the book. So I said, I can do that. So I applied and ultimately won.
That's wonderful. When you were back in your, solely screenwriting days, did you have a lot of experience with other contests, or is
I
that some?
did. You know, it's interesting because oftentimes with contests, you never really, you look at the judges and you think, okay, this might be a good year for me to enter this particular script. But because the industry is always fluctuating, and changes happen according to trends and what's going on. There's been times where I've entered a script into a contest, and I've gotten maybe an email from a judge that says, "Man, it was great. I liked it," but essentially the industry is not looking for this right now. So that's why I are in the case I'm thinking of. I had submitted, I think it was a few years ago, to a contest, and I didn't win, and so I said, "Oh, it is what it is. You kind of, keep moving."
Right.
But I got an email because I inquired about it. I hadn't heard anything, and so I got an email, and they said, "Oh yeah, you didn't hear anything as I suspected because I didn't win." But they provided me some really good feedback and said, like, well, it's great, but it's hard for us to sell, the noir, kind of modern noir, intellectual property, essentially, right? So that's one of the hurdles, I think, when it comes to writing a script that is like a crime or mystery, is that unless you have a big actor attached, or you have a producer who just really specializes in that and has the relationships to get that thing off the ground, it's tough to sell, especially in a high concept kind of industry. It's hard to sell those character driven crime dramas. Not that it can't be done. We see it all the time, but oftentimes they're on a much smaller scale. And they're more along the lines of independent. Unless you're a big director and that's what you do, that's what you're looking for. And so that's kind of been what I found, in terms of screenwriting. Now, of course, if it's based on a book, and that book had some moderate success, you have a better shot. And so that's kind of the reason I applied to Book Pipeline, because I said, well, the book exists, and it's out and it's fresh, and if everything goes well, I'll keep garnering reviews, and readership will grow, and has a good shot, versus when I adapted The Science of Paul, a book that came out originally in 2011, and trying to sell that adaptation now is a lot tougher.
Okay, well, that's really interesting, and I absolutely want to go into, your novel writing journey, and going from Shotgun Honey to Thomas and Mercer. But before we get to that, I think that one of the things, and this is something that I think people, I don't want to say misuse a lot, but it seems like one of the key components of doing these contests was getting feedback. You found out from, somebody as a result of the contest that this sort of thing was hard to produce. You learned from their feedback about it. And I'm sure that was also true through other, either successes or rejections. That getting that feedback and seeing what was commercial or what was resonating with whatever type of reader it was and what wasn't, was extremely valuable. But I think that a lot of people either don't pay attention to, or don't ask for feedback, and take it as criticism instead of a learning point. So was it always easy for you to, because I know that these things are like commenting basically on, your children. It's something that's a labor of love, and months or years of work. So it can't always be easy to hear, I didn't love it, even if it's a, reason such as this was great, but it's just not marketable right now. Um, do you have any advice for people who don't, shall we say, don't know how to take feedback very well?
Well, that's a good question. Advice wise, I would say, you if you're serious about and you want to be professional and you are serious about becoming an author, it's all about feedback. You're going to get feedback from the beginning in terms of, potentially reaching out to beta readers. You're going to get feedback from a plethora of editors. And you have to take it. If it's one of those things where if it applies, then you take it. If it doesn't, then you keep moving on. But you really have to have a mentality is what your mentality should be. Whatever information you get could be useful to you. So you should be kind of like you should be like a receptor. Like you should be open to receiving, like an antenna, open to receiving as much as you can, in terms of feedback, as long as that feedback is coming from a place of wanting to help you, right? There can be instances where, and I'm thinking more for myself when I was in my MFA program, and we were workshopping things, there's going to be times where people just aren't going to get what you're doing. It could be because they're not familiar with the genre. It could be because they just don't like what you're writing about. But you really have to be insightful and move and be able to look past that type of feedback and kind of zero in on the feedback that's designed to help. And I think maybe that's one of the toughest parts of receiving feedback is, especially if you're a writer starting out, is because it's so close to you, it's so personal, that sometimes it could be tough because you think that feedback now is a commentary on you as a writer versus a commentary on what you've written. And so those are two very different things. So, someone can not like a particular aspect of your plot or a character, but it doesn't mean that somehow that now negates the things that you did correctly or the things that you did well or that you think work, and that maybe other people think work. And so, that's the approach. The approach is take what applies, and if it doesn't, just kind of keep it moving. Especially if you're confident about what you're writing and hey, I know this story works. It's a certain feeling that you get when you have a story that works, that you just keep moving, even if someone says, I don't really like this, or I don't like this concept, I don't like this plot, and you say, okay, well, why don't you? And if they give you feedback that's useful, but you stay the course, and that's what's really important. Now, if you're just one of those individuals who struggle with just hearing any kind of criticism or feedback, it's going to be a hard road because especially whether you're a screenwriter or a budding novelist, that you kind of have to get over that quickly because there is a lot of doors that get shut in both industries. There's a lot of sorry, this is not going to work for us, or we're not the right fit. All kind of euphemisms for basically saying we're not into it, right? And we don't particularly like it. So you have to adapt and get used to that because it's going to happen a lot. And if you are an individual who is prone to getting down easily when someone says that they don't particularly like something, you should always remember that there are many other very successful folks who have come before you who suffered the same kind of defeat. And so you are not alone. Oftentimes writers who have, bestsellers will say, well, I had 100 and something rejections,
Yep.
but I kept going until I found the right publisher, the right agent. And that's really what it is. I'm a huge hip hop fan. And so I often tell my students, especially my younger students who I know, are Jay-Z fans. And I tell him, I say, Jay-Z never was, he will admit he was never the greatest rapper. There was other people who were better. But what Jay-Z did was he maintained a level of consistency. He made sure that every summer he put out an album, and he just kept doing that. And that he just, made sure that he got better, and that he was really building a brand for himself, something that a lot of artists weren't able to do, especially the time that he was able to do it. And so that's why he's still here today, because it was consistency. He outlasted a lot of people who came and went, who had, success at that time, especially in the 90s, but he continued. And now he's rebranded himself, and he does many things. He produces movies and TV shows and all types of things. So that's what it's about. It's about having a vision for yourself and just staying the course, and not really letting anyone deter you.
Well, I think that's wonderful advice. And, I always say that, first of all, you and I both have chosen a subjective profession. Unlike, let's say, the LAPD, where there quite literally is, a rule, which it's either broken or it's not. In writing, everything, you will never find something that everybody likes. So you can't expect everybody to like everything that you've ever done. And that's hard, but keeping that in mind. But also, I think there's a inherent fallacy in the word rejection that kind of catches like wildfire amongst writers. Writers are obsessed with rejection. And to me, it's really not, rejection is almost the wrong word, because when you're being rejected, whether it's by a potential agent, whether it's a potential editor or a potential reader, because realize these are all, at the end of the day, they're all readers. So basically you're looking for that reader who's like, oh my God, I can't wait to read this. I'm going to stay up all night reading this book. And that's what you want in your agent. And that's what you want in your editor. And that's hopefully what you're going to get when you finally publish the book and you get a reader. But not every reader is going to pick up every book. And it's not like you go into a bookstore and you pick up a book and you read the back of it and you're like, you throw it on the ground and be like, this should never have been on a bookshelf. It's just like, hey, this isn't for me, not today. And it might be something you pick up later, but it's just not what you're in the mood for at that moment. And really that's what rejection is, but putting that word rejection on it. And I like to think of it, honestly, in a sense, I think finding an agent or an editor or a reader is, the analogy is, dating. You want the person who's going to be,
what it is.
It's basically, it could not be more similar. And you want that person on your team, again, agent, editor, or reader / fan, that is super passionate about your book. And so those quote unquote rejections are just, people who aren't the best cheerleader for you. So I kind of would want to know that up front personally. So I think of those rejections as not rejections, but you're just winnowing the pool. Oh, okay. So now I know these people aren't the right one for me. So now the pool is narrower. I'm closer to finding the one who's going to be super passionate about my writing, which is what you want. And I just think that people get so caught up in that word rejection and put such a negative, it's not a fun thing, no matter what. But it really is just narrowing the pool out there.
I agree. It's I look at it, that's a good way to put it, is that it is kind of like, it's speed dating, right? So when you send out these queries, you're saying, hey, this is me, this is what I wrote, this is my background, and you send it out and you hope that someone looks at that and says, hey, this is interesting, I'd like to know more, right? And that's it really, exactly. When we're querying and we're reaching out, that's what success is. You're trying to get that, that person, that editor, if you're going the independent route, the publisher, you're trying to get an agent, whatever the case may be, you want that person to say, I would like to learn more. Let me reach out to this person, because so much when it comes to these relationships, when it comes to the publishing industry and the film industry, that's what it is. It's all built on connection. And so if you can have a connection with a publisher, or you have a connection with an agent, maybe that particular book, they say, hey, this one's not for me, but let me see what else you got. Or if you're working on something else, once that's ready, send it my way. And so that's why you want to approach, one kind of shut door, and maybe it doesn't even fully shut, right? So it kind of just closes a little bit, but then, it's open a crack. And so you want to be able to kind of exploit that crack. Like when the time comes and you say, hey, I know this story is it. This is the one. You can reach back out to that individual and say, hey, remember, we met at a conference, or I sent you, this, that, and the other, and it wasn't a good fit for you at that time, but I have something else, and I'm really passionate about this, and this is why this story means a lot to me, and I'd like to share it with you. And so that's, that should be the approach. I think sometimes we and I see it a lot of times with my students and even young writers who are just kind of starting out. It's all transaction. It's just transaction-based kind of approach to things. Like, I might have a writing student who will say, well, I know this person put this book out, and, I like this book, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this person that I love this book so much, and I'm going to ask them who their agent is and see what they can do for me. And I'm going to blast their book all over social media. And is that a good approach? And I'll say, well, no, that's not, that's nice to do, but you're doing it because you think like, hey, if I make enough noise that this person is, this author is going to like read my work or help me, get an agent or do something. And that's not how it works. And so, we have to, move beyond that and recognize that we're human beings in this business. So we want to conduct ourselves as human beings and not as these kind of, quid pro quo vessels where we're always just trying to see, okay, what can I do? What can I do? I mean, the one thing I love about the crime fiction community is that everybody's so nice. Everyone is just like, what you see is what you get with a lot of people. Yeah. And, last night we had Noir at the Bar in LA. We returned to in person, and it was just great to be in the room.
I was very jealous.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really good night. And it was just so nice to be in the room again, with writers I really respect and that are just cool people, And so, and it makes you want to, because you feel part of a community, it makes you want to help. You don't do it because you're just like, hey, I'm doing this because I hope this person is going to help me one day. No, it's like you're doing it because they're really cool and you enjoy hanging with them. And, I want to help as many writers as I can, just because it feels good. It's nice to see when people are successful, especially if you've been able to kind of watch them grow over the years. And so, it's an enjoyable thing.
No, I completely agree. And I always say, especially in certain genre communities, like it's really a community, everybody is very eager to show you, the next step in the ladder or introduce you or, help you along the way, which is unlike any profession that I've ever been in. Prior to working in, writing and publishing. But, one of the things that you were mentioning is, creating this team and, if you're getting an agent or if you're getting a publisher. And I'd like to talk a little bit before I let you get out of your car. Which he's absolutely not hiding from his 2-year-old in his car. He's not. I swear that's not happening. But but I'd like to know a little bit more about your journey, because obviously now you just won the pipeline contest and you're published through Thomas and Mercer, your most recent series. But your Paul Little series, I know that you were with a publisher prior to Shotgun Honey / Down and Out, which is a much smaller press than Thomas and Mercer, obviously. But I'd like to know a little bit. You said that your book was published basically before you completed your MFA. So can you tell me a little bit about, how you went about that and, finding an agent and then jumping from Shotgun Honey to T&M, just a little bit about that and whether that was the plan or all of this was just a wonderful series of events.
Well, it probably was the latter, but starting out, this is one of the things about, I think, MFA programs is, I received a lot of theory, but when it came to kind of figuring out the publishing industry, we just didn't have a whole lot of classes on it. And so, when I wrote The Science of Paul, I got to a place where I felt it was ready for publication. And so, I had a few people read it. One of those people, James Salas, actually read it. He was my thesis advisor, and James wrote Drive.
Yeah, no, Jim is lovely, and his band is amazing.
Oh yeah, that is true. but I other than that, and I received feedback because they were on my thesis board. But other than that, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know, I hadn't gone to any crime writing conferences or anything, so I had made those connections, and so I just started kind of cold querying, agents, and I received some good feedback and some folks I never even heard back from. So, but I just kind of kept it moving. So I said, okay, well, let me look at independent publishers. And so I had a whole list of independent publishers that I reached out to. And at the time, New Pope Press was pretty new. And at the time, John Bassoff, who was a crime author and horror author in his own right, was running it out of Florida. And so, actually out of Colorado. He's in Colorado. I think it's in Florida now. But, and I sent it to him, and he got back to me and he said, hey, I love this, man. And he's like, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like you could probably get on with probably get an agent or get on with a bigger publisher. And I said, man, I don't know what it is. I said, I have tried, I have tried, and kind of the feedback I've gotten is that, I was writing noir. And so noir is always a interesting thing because people look at it as being a very niche market and publishing. And so they almost shy away from using, the term noir. But John was all about it. So that was the purpose of, New Pope Press. It was to get these noir tales out. So I said, no, I feel like this is the right place for it, because I wasn't going to have to make any changes. Obviously, there's revisions, but I wasn't going to have to change the heart and soul of what the book was. And so he said, all right. And he said, well, I can pay you $200 as an advance. I'll take it. At that time, I was like, I said, I took it proudly because I said, you know what? I get to be, on a press with all these really cool noir authors. And, I think it was like, at that time we had Dave Zelsterman, Lynn Kostoff. So it was tons of just cool writers that were doing really interesting things, and writing in a very fearless way. And I said, you know what, that's where The Science of Paul belongs. And so, that's why I went with New Pope Press. And then later down the line, I was pitching the Shotgun Honey, and they said, well, hey, what's going on with the Science of Paul series? Because it was a 2-book series. The second book is a Healthy Fear of Man. And so I said, well, not a whole lot. I mean, New Pope still has it, and Snub Nose Press had a Healthy Fear of Man. And so they said, well, we want to reissue those if that's possible. And I said, sure, let's do it. And so it gave those books, a new life, and was able to get out to more readers. And so that's kind of how that went. And so then when I entered LAPD, that was the only time I really stopped writing, and that was 2014. And that's a whole other. I don't know. We may need an intermission in terms of the podcast.
Part two.
but that's a whole other thing. I joined having, I believe I was the first published author to join the LAPD. The closest they had before me was the nephew of Donald Goines, who they didn't realize who he was. And when they found out who he was, this is what I heard. When they found out who he was, they kicked him out. They didn't want, they thought he was in there like researching or something. Now, I didn't go in with that in mind. I went in because, I always had this, we have all these kind of things we want to do in life. And I always had this desire, coming from a law enforcement family, to go that route. And I said to myself, you know what? I said, there was benefits with it. I'm a millennial, student loan. They said, they get rid of your student loans if, you're there for a certain amount of time. There's lots of jobs in the LAPD, communication division, the division that handles also commercials and filmmaking. So there's a lot of things that, I was going to be able to do without necessarily, being on the street, but, they put you in the chief's, work with the chiefs and do all types of things. So, that was really my approach. It was like, okay, well, I'll keep writing and see how this goes, but at least I have a career. I have this pension. Ultimately, once I was in there, I suffered an injury and couldn't finish. And so I got out and then went back to teaching. And so I had been an adjunct professor at a variety of universities and colleges. And so I went back to that. And then years later, I was at a place where I felt like I could write about my kind of loosely based on my experience as a recruit. And I really wanted to write a novel that kind of gave voice to Black law enforcement, which I think doesn't always have a voice in certain settings, especially when, at the time it was the, Blue Lives Matter, there's kind of the rise of, which was in opposition in many ways to Black Lives Matter. And there was so much going on when I was in the academy, in 2014, and everything had become so politicized in there, to the point where if you asked the wrong question about, a real life event, you were told keep politics out of it. And I kept thinking, well, this should be the place that we have those types of conversations that relate to police brutality, that relate to how we're working with the community. But there was this kind of wall that was like, no, don't bring that in here. And so, I think it did a great disservice to many of, to many of the recruits who were in my class, because I think that was a missed opportunity to really have discussions that needed to take place. They may be having those discussions now. I mean, I hope so, especially after this last summer. But
one would hope.
I don't know. Yeah. But I hope that things have evolved beyond that kind of keep your head down, do your job kind of thing. And so I felt like I really wanted to, and that's why I set the novel in Under Color of Law in 2014, because I felt like that was the tipping point in some ways, because it seemed like that's when the shift started to happen. And I remember in one of my academy classes that, I don't know how it even came up, but a lot of the recruits said, I'm more conservative minded. This is kind of how I see the world. I think they were trying to get at how people, probably with a course on bias or something, but, they were trying to get at what we bring to the job, and how we need to mitigate that and keep that out of the job, which is very hard to do. And so I just remember, I would say at least 85% of my class identified as having, having these very strong conservative views. They said, well, I listen mostly to Fox News or what have you. And, it's just very interesting that there was not a lot of diversity, period, but it wasn't a lot of diversity of thought. And I thought, that's problematic. If you don't have, a lot of different folks who are working who have different viewpoints, and, the idea that just because you put on that uniform doesn't erase all of that. And so for Black police officers, it's different, because when you're out of uniform, you can be perceived a completely different way. You can be conceived even in uniform in a certain way, as we saw with, January 6th and what was going on there, in terms of how the police were being treated, but particularly the Black officers who were, being called racial slurs and things of that nature. So,
it's horrifying.
I felt like, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of people don't, what I found is like a lot of people don't give much thought to what that is like. To be a Black police officer, especially if you're working within, the Black community, it's certain things you're seen as almost other, like you don't belong or you can't be trusted. And so there's all these issues. And I wanted to, write a novel that captured that in terms of mood, in terms of world. And I wanted there to be this crime that would force the detective, in this case, Trevor Finnegan, that would force him to have to confront some of these things that he kind of set aside because it was just a little bit too hard to think about. Or it was easier just to focus on career, not have to think about all these other things. Right. But now if you're forced to have to think about these things, how does that impact you in terms of doing your job? And so that really was the approach.
No,
I don't know if I answered the question.
Well, look, I forgot what the question was. This was way more interesting, I'm sure, than whatever it was that I asked. No, I think that's really relevant, and it's interesting to come at it from, that angle, because I think you're right. There really aren't that many voices that talk about it, what it's like from the inside. When there's such, obviously there's institutional racism within a lot of law enforcement agencies, which just compounds because of the issues that everybody is facing today. I would think it would have to be a tremendously hard experience. And I applaud anybody who, runs that gauntlet and does that. So yeah, I have no idea what my question was, but it was a brilliant response. I will go back to career for one more question, because, well, mostly it's on my mind these days, because that's kind of the thesis of the class that I'm doing right now for my MFA students is, figuring out what you're, thinking past that first book, because the experience that I've had, I had it when I went to law school, but so many MFA students, like you just expressed, you had it. You don't know what to do once you've got that book. It was all about churning it out. And then there's very little about the business of publishing or, how to think past that. And so the MFA program that I work with is absolutely wonderful. Because they bring people in to, teach the students things like that. And I always joke that when I left law school, I had no idea where to file the brief that I wrote. They just don't tell you that, because they assume, you're going to work at a big law firm and have clerks and secretaries and assistants, and they'll do that for you. And so me not wanting to go that route, I was completely lost. And I think a lot of MFA students are as well. So what, in your opinion, is the biggest difference between having worked with the, smaller press, Shotgun Honey, Down and Out, which, I worked with Eric Campbell myself at Down and Out, and he's an amazing person and a great publisher. And I think it was, a wonderful experience for me. And he chooses great authors and great imprints to work with. But what's the major difference for you in the experience, just, what was it like working with a smaller press versus what is it like working with a much, an imprint through Amazon, Thomas and Mercer? And was that kind of intentional? Did you want to switch series, because obviously this is a different and new series for you? Was that part of your career plan to make that, switch with a new series, or how did that come about? And what's the, I don't want to say pluses and minuses because there are in everything, but the major differences in dealing with a small press versus starting off with a larger one?
Yeah, I mean, the small press, oftentimes the person who's running things, is the editor, is the book designer, the cover designer. You're dealing, it's just smaller. And so when you're having conversations, you're having conversations with one individual. And in some cases as an author, you even have a little bit more, I would say freedom in terms of like cover design. Your input may be utilized differently than with a larger press. And so, that's kind of was my experience was, I was able to say, hey, this is my thought in terms of, cover design or kind of the look that I was going for. And then they would bounce ideas back and forth. And, like I said, it's very small. You're dealing with maybe one or two people. Once you move over to a much larger press or commercial press, you're talking about marketing department, you're talking about the PR department. So, they don't even, they will not buy a book until it already has circulated through all these departments, and all these departments have signed off and said, hey, I think we can sell this. I think this is something that we can work with. Small press, it's probably one person. It's just like, I like your story, I'm going to put it out, and that's it. It's not, it doesn't get circulated to the departments like, hey, I like your story. You know what we do? We do these kinds of books, and we have a nice size readership, or people look for our new titles, and that's that. And that's that. They're very much upfront with what they can and can't do in terms of marketing, and most of it is going to fall on you. Well, I would say with the commercial press, obviously you have a book launch. You're going to get you may get some media coverage, different types of media coverage. Maybe you get, some magazine coverage, or you get circulated around the crime blogs and things like that. So it's a little bit less heavy lifting, but you still are kind of, I would say where it's similar to the small press is that it's still kind of on you. You still kind of have to advocate for your book. You have to get out there, and a lot of this is predicated on the relationships that you formed, in publishing and in terms of working with other authors and things like that. So, it's similarities and differences, but at the heart, I would say it's probably more similarities in some ways. Maybe the advance might not be as big with a small press, but in terms of you getting out there and getting your story out there and making those connections, that's always going to be you. Same thing with the commercial press. You'll get a nice boost in terms of getting word out in terms of your book, but you still have to be the one to keep that going, to make sure that the buzz is still there, especially because there's so many books that are constantly coming out that are, everyone's vying for the spotlight. And so, because of that, you have to be, you kind of have to be aware going in and know that, okay, I have to perhaps take a different approach, or I need to, find media outlets that I know my readers know attract the type of reader that I'm looking for, or a type of reader that I know is going to go out and cheerlead for my book and stuff. And so, and everything now is on it. It's Instagram, it's social media. And so, that's a big part of it too, is making sure that you're doing the whole, Instagram thing and Twitter thing, and making sure that the word is getting out. And so, I would say that's pretty much it. At the end of the day, the differences are going to be, maybe your advanced size and maybe you get a nice little boost when it comes out. But after that, not a whole lot is going to change in terms of, promoting and marketing your work long term.
Okay, so last question, then I'll let you get out of the car. I hope you have enough air in there. You're suddenly running out of oxygen. Somebody's going to come break the window. So what's coming for you next that we can, read or watch? Give me also some of your, social media, where to find you. And also tell me what you're reading or watching that you would recommend right now.
Oh, sure. So, Blue Like Me is the next Trevor Finnegan novel, and that is slated to be published November 2022.
Okay.
And so that's with Thomas and Mercer. And so, I am currently working on revisions. In addition to that, I am writing the pilot script based on Under Color of Law. So I am working on that.
That's exciting.
And hopefully very exciting. I mean, I hope to be done and hope to, start looking at revisions in January. So I'm working on that now. And in terms of what I'm reading, truthfully, lately it's been a lot of toddler-related books. So my son's a big fan of, the little blue truck. That is the hit in our household right now. But but outside of that, I am about halfway done with Gary Phillips's Matthew Henson.
Isn't that
novel.
so good?
So I love it.
We're
so cool.
We're excited for a sequel. Yeah. So
it's just just the idea, behind it. It's just so cool. And then, and the way Gary writes. I mean,
Gary's
so
amazing.
Cinematic. I'm really enjoying that. So I'm about halfway through that. And in addition to that, I went back and I have been reading Paula Wood's Charlotte Justice series. So I kind of been revisiting that because she writes about LAPD as well. And so, kind of diving back into that, it being set in the 90s and just kind of looking at it from like, okay, how have things kind of changed, from when the first book came out, Inner City Blues, till now. And so, it's been kind of cool. It's almost like a time capsule to kind of read that. And then, as I'm kind of working now, Blue Like Me is set in 2016. And so, being able to kind of see how things have changed and maybe things haven't, in terms of the department and really the city of LA, has been kind of cool. So those are two things that are kind of, on my plate now, but I have a huge, TBR pile. And
as do we all. Someday it will fall over and kill us. I know.
It just keeps growing, especially after last night. So, at the bar. So I have many books now that have been added to that list as well. But I try and balance. So, if I know that the list of books is growing, I will kind of get the audiobook. Not a huge fan because I prefer to read, but I know that sometimes I just want to hear the story, while I'm taking my son for a walk or something like that. So I will pop over to the audiobook.
No, I think that's great. I do both too. I just, however we consume them, as long as we're enjoying it, I think that's wonderful. So thank you Thank you so much.
Exactly.
I guesstimated that we'd go over time, and I was in fact correct. And I have a list of questions that we didn't even get to. So I absolutely hope that you will grace us with your presence again, and we can talk about
Of
all
course,
those
this has been
stories
great.
that we didn't get to tell. So meanwhile, you can let yourself out of your self-imposed vehicular exile, and I hope that you have wonderful holidays, and I'll let you know when this goes live and give you links and everything. And yeah, really, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to add my social media handle.
Please.
So you can learn more about me at my official website, which is aaronphillipclark.com. I'm also on Facebook at Aaron Phillip Clark, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at _write me a world.
And just so listeners know, Philip is with one L and Aaron is with two A's, because that would be a mistake I would make if I were listening in. So, all right. Thank you so much, Aaron. And again, keep us posted on everything you've got going on, and please come and visit us in the new year.
This has been Words of Prey, and it is a Pipeline Artists original. And Pipeline Artists focuses on education, empowerment, and elevating authentic voices in film, publishing, and beyond. And you can contact us and the other future podcasts at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com. And you can find us and a bunch of other amazing podcasts at pipelineartist.com/listen. And if you have any suggestions for guests or anything else, or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will see you next time.